exploring energy, motion, and stability. Learn how objects store and use energy. Lesson objectives. In this lesson, you will explore how energy is stored in objects using concepts like potential and kinetic energy. You'll also learn about motion and the importance of stability in everyday life. Through examples and exercises, you'll see how these forces work and why they matter in the world around you. Objectives. Learn how potential energy is related to an object's position. Learn how kinetic energy changes with speed and mass. Understand the concepts of motion and stability. Applying energy and motion concepts. Think about riding a bike down a hill. You'll feel the potential energy turning into kinetic energy as you speed up. And once you stop, you remain stable until the next push. This happens whenever you travel on bikes or cars in your daily life. Reflect on a moment you experienced the change from potential to kinetic energy in your life. How did it feel? What happened next? Words to know. Potential energy. The energy stored in an object due to its position or condition, like a rock on a hill. Gravitational potential energy. A type of potential energy related to an object's height above the ground. Kinetic energy. Energy that an object possesses due to its motion. Mass. The amount of matter in an object which stays the same everywhere. Stability. The ability of an object to remain in its current position without moving. Dependent variable. The variable in an experiment that is affected by changes in the independent variable. Independent variable. The variable in an experiment that is changed to see its effects. How height affects potential energy. Potential energy is a type of energy stored in objects due to their position. When you hold a rock on top of a hill, it has gravitational potential energy because of its height. The higher the rock, the more potential energy it has. This energy can change into kinetic energy, which is the energy of movement, when the rock falls. You can think of potential energy when you see anything placed high up, like a book on a shelf. If it falls, the energy it's stored will turn into movement energy. Let's try it. How height affects potential energy. What happens to potential energy when a rock falls from a height? A. It increases. B. It changes into kinetic energy. C. It stays the same. D. It disappears. Let's try it together. How height affects potential energy. If Amira puts a rock on a hill that is 5 feet high, how much more potential energy does it have than on the ground, assuming it had no potential energy on the ground? Write your response in the space below. Speed and mass in kinetic energy. Kinetic energy is the energy of motion. When an object moves, it has kinetic energy. The faster it moves, the more kinetic energy it gains. Also, objects with more mass, like a bowling ball, will have more kinetic energy than lighter objects, like a tennis ball, at the same speed. You can see kinetic energy in action when you watch cars driving on a road or when you ride a bike. The faster you go, the more energy you feel. Let's try it. Speed and mass in kinetic energy. If Javier rolls a 10-pound bowling ball and a 1-pound tennis ball down the same hill, which one will have more kinetic energy and why? Write your response in the space below. Let's try it together. Speed and mass in kinetic energy. Describe what happens to the kinetic energy if a car accelerates from walking speed to highway speed. Write your response in the space below. Stability and how objects move. Stability is the ability for an object to stay in its position. When an object is stable, it stays put until a force acts on it. In experiments, we use dependent and independent variables to understand how different factors affect stability and motion. You can see the importance of stability when building card houses or while sitting on a chair. Without stability, both could easily fall. Experimenting with energy. Scientists use experiments to study energy. They use an independent variable, what we change, for example, the mass of an object. The dependent variable, what we measure, for example, kinetic energy. Here's an example experiment. How does mass affect kinetic energy? If you roll different sized balls down a ramp and measure their speed at the bottom, and then calculate the kinetic energy for each, what will you determine? That would be an example experiment. Let's try it. Stability and how objects move. If Mariko conducts an experiment to see how wind affects a tall tower's stability, what is the dependent variable? Write your response in the space below. Let's try it together. Stability and how objects move. In a science experiment where you change the size of a paper airplane's wings to see how far it flies, what is the independent variable? A, the distance the airplane flies. B, the size of the airplane's wings. C, the color of the airplane. Or D, the material of the airplane. Here are some examples of potential and kinetic energy. The example we have first is a rock on a tall hill. It has a high level of potential energy, a heavy mass, and a high level of kinetic energy when moving. High height gives it more potential energy, and its heavy mass creates high kinetic energy when falling. The next example is a rock on a short hill. It has a low amount of potential energy, a heavy mass still, but also a low amount of kinetic energy. Its lower height means less potential energy, but it's still heavy, so it has a moderate kinetic energy. The third example is a tennis ball on a tall hill. It has a high level of potential energy, a light mass, and a moderate amount of kinetic energy when moving. Its high height gives potential energy, but its low mass creates lower kinetic energy. The fourth example is a bowling ball rolling down a ramp. It has a low amount of potential energy due to its position, not being very high on the ramp. It has a lot of mass because it's a bowling ball, and it has a moderate amount of kinetic energy when moving. The low height gives less potential energy, but its heavy mass makes it have more kinetic energy than a lighter object. Finally, a tennis ball rolling down a ramp has a low amount of potential energy because the ramp isn't very high, has a light mass, and it has a low amount of kinetic energy. Low height and low mass lead to less potential energy and less kinetic energy. Think about the lesson. What is one thing you learned or one question you have about today's lesson? Write or draw your response in the space below. Exit ticket. How height affects potential energy. What is potential energy? A, energy of movement. B, energy from food. C, stored energy due to position. Or D, energy from the sun. Exit ticket. Speed and mass and kinetic energy. Which object moving at the same speed has more kinetic energy? A heavy truck. B, a light bicycle. C, a paper airplane. Or D, a light feather. Exit ticket. Stability and how objects move. Explain why a book sitting on a table is considered stable.